The stadium had been built for speed. Long ago, crowds had filled the stands until the concrete shook under the weight of their feet. Flags had snapped in the wind. Loudspeakers had crackled with announcements. On race days, the air above the track had tasted of dust, sweat, and excitement. The oval of sand in the center had been smooth and firm. Hooves had hammered it in waves lap after lap as sleek horses sprinted for the finish line. People had shouted the names of their favorites until their throats burned. Trainers had watched with folded arms and tight jaws. Somewhere up in the glass booth, someone had always leaned over a microphone and tried to put the thunder of hooves into words. Time had moved on. New sports and new screens had taken people's attention. The racing club had lost sponsors. The last big event had come and gone with less noise than anyone expected. Fewer horses had been stabled nearby. Fewer trainers had walked the track in the early mornings. One season, the main gate had stayed locked between every weekend. The next season, it had stayed locked all the time. Grass began to grow in the cracks of the concrete stairs. Tiny pale weeds pushed their way through the edges of the track. Paint peeled from the barriers. The loudspeakers went silent. Birds made nests in the metal frames of the floodlights. The stadium had not been completely abandoned. A lone caretaker had walked there for a while, checking fences and doors, but even that job had been cut in the end. After that, only the wind and the stray cats moved freely through the place. The empty seats watched nothing at all. At the edge of the property lay a small farm. It had once provided fresh horses for the races. Young animals had grown strong in its paddocks and then gone on to find their speed on the stadium track. The farm had known busy days too. Stable doors slamming, voices calling across the yard, the sweet smell of hay and the sharp smell of liniment. When the races stopped, the farm had slowly shrunk. One by one, the stalls had emptied. Some horses had been sold. Some had aged in place and then been buried under the trees. Fences had been patched quickly, then not patched at all. Machinery had rusted in a corner. Buildings had leaned a little more each year. In the end, only a few animals remained. Among them was a mare who had never raced. She had been born after the last big season, when the owners were already talking about selling off the best bloodlines and moving away. She had grown up behind a tired wooden fence that looked out over the back side of the stadium. The mare had a plain but solid body. Her coat was a soft brown with a darker stripe along her spine. Her mane tended to tangle if no one brushed it. A faint white mark ran down the middle of her face, stopping just before her nose. Her eyes were clear and dark. She had never heard of full stadium. To her, the oval beyond the fence was simply another shape on the horizon. She saw tall light towers, now dark. She saw the curve of the stands, now empty. In the evenings, when the sun dropped behind the structure, she saw a long shadow roll across the fields. She had grown used to the silence. On some days, a thin wind carried the echo of a city from behind the stadium. She heard faraway traffic, a dog barking, a siren that came and went. But from the track itself, there came only the dry sigh of grass and the tired creak of old metal. Then, one spring, a storm arrived that did not care about history. It rolled in from the hills with thick clouds and hard, slanting rain. Lightning forked behind the stadium towers. The wind hit the farm in heavy, angry pushes. It pressed against loose boards and shook nails that had already lost their strength. Somewhere in the backfield, A piece of fence gave way. The mare had taken shelter under a tree at first. When the rain came at its hardest, she turned her hindquarters to the wind and lowered her head. The world blurred into cold water and sound. Branches thrashed above her. When the storm began to move away, the air changed. Rain weakened. The wind lowered its voice. Distant thunder walked off toward other valleys. The mare lifted her head, steam rising from her damp coat, and shook herself, sending droplets outward in a wide circle. She smelled wet earth, broken leaves, and something else. She walked toward it, hooves sinking into softened ground. At the back of the field, she found the broken section of fence. 2 boards had snapped. One post leaned at an angle, pulled out of the mud by the storm. Beyond it lay a strip of rough land, and beyond that, the back perimeter of the old stadium. The mare did not understand the idea of boundaries in the same way people did. She knew limits, where the ground grew too soft, where the ditch was too steep, where the road smelled too sharp of machines. The fence had been one of those limits. Now, the familiar pattern of its boards was broken. She stretched her neck cautiously through the gap and sniffed. The air beyond smelled of wet grass and old dust. No electric sting reached her nose, no sharp chemical, no fresh paint, no strong trace of other horses. Only the faint, dry scent of weeds and stone. She stepped through. The ground there had been unused for a long time. Old gravel hid under a skin of soil. Spiky plants scratched her legs. She moved slowly, placing her hooves with care, ears moving like small radar dishes, catching each new sound. The stadium loomed higher as she approached. From the outside, its walls rose in wide, curving slabs. There were doors with chains on them, gates with rusted locks, blind windows in concrete. The mare heard a loose sign tapping in the wind. She saw a stray plastic bag caught in a bush, jerking and twisting as if it were trying to gallop without legs. She might have turned back. Many animals do not like enclosed spaces. The arch of the nearest entrance tunnel felt like a cave mouth. The air around it was cooler. It carried a faint smell of old metal and sand. For a long moment she stood just outside, breathing and listening. Then a small bird flew past her ears and into the tunnel. Its wings flicked in front of her nose. It crossed the shadow without hesitation and emerged again into a wider light on the other side. The mare followed. Her hooves sounded loud inside the passage. The tunnel carried the noise forward in a tight, metallic way. Each step struck the concrete and bounced back to her ears, doubled. She snorted softly and kept walking. The tunnel opened onto the infield of the stadium. For a breath, she froze. The place was larger than anything she had imagined. The track made a pale ring that wrapped all the way around her. The stands rose in tiers, seat upon seat, row upon row, climbing toward the sky. Faded banners hung in tatters from railings. The tall light towers stood like silent trees of steel. Grass had crept in where it could. It grew in patches on the infield. It tufted along the inner edge of the track. It sprouted between the seats and on the steps. In some places, small bushes had taken root, their branches reaching out into the open air. The mare stepped forward. Her hooves left damp prints on the packed earth of the infield. The air here carried a strange stillness. It was not quite the quiet of a field. It was something tighter, something held. She could not know that the stadium had once held noise so loud that it had carved a shape into the very air, but her body felt a faint residue of it. She lowered her head and tasted the grass. It was rough and thick and not nearly as fresh as the pasture at the farm, but it carried an unfamiliar flavor. Dust, iron, a pinch of the old energy that had soaked into the ground when hooves pounded and crowds roared. She chewed, swallowed, and took another step. The first echo came when she decided to walk across the track itself. She reached the inner edge, where the grass met the pale ring of old racing surface. The sand there had thinned and hardened. It still held the shape of the oval, even after the years. The mare placed her front right hoof on it. The sound of that contact was simple. One dull thud of weight on compacted ground. The stadium did not let it stay simple. It took that single sound and threw it back at her, multiplied. From the far side of the oval came the answer, a series of thinner, lighter hoofbeats, as if many horses had shown up late and were catching the rhythm of the first. The noise ran along the curve, bounced off the stands, and returned in a rolling wave. The mare snorted and jerked her head up. Her ears flicked forward, then back, then forward again. Her muscles tightened along her spine. For a breath, she stood completely still, body ready to flee. Nothing moved. Dust drifted in a narrow beam of sunlight. A bird crossed the top of the stands. The old banners fluttered a little. The track itself remained empty. The echo settled. The mare exhaled loudly. Steam puffed from her nostrils. She shook her mane and stamped again, this time with more force, as if testing the ground. The sound repeated. One beat, then many. This time she heard the pattern more clearly. Her own hoof made the first note, heavy and close. The returning sound came a heartbeat later, lighter, faster, as if a whole pack of hooves had followed her lead. She took another step. Her second hoofbeat joined the first new pattern. The stadium took it, stretched it, and sent it around the curve. Now the noise came back as a short burst of galloping, a cluster of impacts that seemed to travel along invisible bodies. The mare's heart began to hammer in her chest in time with the phantom hooves. She walked onto the track fully. With each step, the echo responded. When she moved slowly, it answered slowly. When she quickened, it quickened. When she stopped suddenly, the sound remembered one more step and then another, as if the invisible herd needed a moment to settle. The mare was not used to hearing other horses and seeing none. She had grown up with the steady noises of a few remaining animals at the farm. Hooves on wood, hay rustling, occasional snorts and whinnies. Those sounds always came with bodies. Here, sound came first. She turned her head, trying to catch sight of the others who seemed to be running with her. There was nothing but the pale track and the green infield, and the thousands of empty seats looking on like hollow eyes. She drifted into a slow trot. Her hooves dug deeper into the sand. The echo leaped up, delighted. It grew brighter, stronger, less timid. It ran alongside her in the air, sometimes slightly ahead, sometimes slightly behind. The stadium remembered. Every race that had ever played out here had left a mark in the shape of the sound. Years of hooves had tuned the concrete and the railings. The walls knew which frequencies to hold and which to throw upward into the open air. The oval itself had become a kind of instrument. Without knowing it, the mare was teaching the echo to gallop again. She began with a cautious, uneven rhythm. Her steps were careful at first, then freer as her body relaxed under the open sky. The echo copied her, then added its own variations, filling in gaps, rounding off corners until it sounded less like a single animal and more like a group. She broke into a canter. Her body remembered things she had never been taught. The curve of the track guided her. The slight bank at the turn gently nudged her inward. Space opened ahead of her in a clean line. Her muscles stretched, her breathing deepened. The wind, thin as it was, slid along her flanks. The echo exploded. Hooves returned from every side. They beat on the distant straight. They thundered on the far turn. They chased her from behind and arrived ahead of her, as if a full field of horses had appeared between one breath and the next. The mare flicked her ears back and flattened them briefly, as if annoyed by a crowd pressing too close. Instinct told her she was in company. Instinct told her to hold her line, to run, to keep the circle. She did. Round and round she went, brown body against pale sand, solitary flesh in the middle of ghost sound. Above her, the empty stands leaned forward. Seats that had once held shouting spectators now held only dust and small plants. Yet the shape of their listening remained. The echo bounced off their steps and railings, turned and rolled back down in waves. For a long time, there had been no one to hear that hidden movement. Now, there was. If anyone had been standing at one of the blocked entrances, they might have heard a strange thing. Out of the quiet of an abandoned stadium would have risen the layered noise of hooves and breathing, of weight on sand, of a race in full flight. If they had looked in, they would have seen only a single mare circling. No one was there. The farm owner had not yet noticed the broken fence. No city officials came to check the outer gates. The caretaker had been gone for years. The only living witnesses were the small creatures who made their homes in the cracks: sparrows, mice, a few lizards, and the insects that hummed in the grass. Still, the echo played for them. After a while, the mare slowed. Her sides heaved gently. Sweat darkened her coat in small patches. She was not trained for endless laps. Her life had been made of shorter runs, quick bursts in fields and yards. She dropped from canter to trot, then from trot to walk. The echo did not want to stop. It carried her last burst around the oval one more time, as if unwilling to let go. Ghost hooves finished their imagined stretch long after the real hooves had fallen silent. The final notes faded slowly into the high corners of the stadium. The mare walked along the inner rail, her head lowered, her ears relaxed. She nosed the metal barrier, smelling old paint and the faint remains of human hands. Here and there, she stepped over weeds that had grown where no hooves had passed for a long time. She felt calmer now. The panic that had flared with the first multiplied hoofbeats had settled into something else, something like curiosity or recognition. Her muscles held the memory of the run. Her lungs, though working harder than usual, were not distressed. Little by little, she understood that whatever had run with her was not a danger. It was a shadow, made of sound. She stopped near the place where the finish line had once been painted. The white stripe had mostly washed away, but a faint difference in color still marked the spot. The mare stood with one hoof just beyond it, breathing clouds into the cool air. The echo sighed around her like a tired crowd. If echoes could feel, this one might have felt grateful. It had been sitting in the corners of the stadium for many seasons, waiting for something heavy and real to strike the track again. Wind had moved through. Rain had drummed on the seats. Birds had landed on railings. None of that had woken the old pattern. A single horse had done what all that weather could not do. The mare did not know any of this. She only knew that the big empty place did not feel so empty anymore. She walked slowly to the infield, found a slightly softer patch of grass, and rolled. Her body crashed down, sending a small wave through the ground. She turned over, legs kicking briefly in the air, dust and bits of dry plant matter clinging to her damp coat. The echo tried to follow this movement too, turning her fall into a muffled impact that bounced once along the stands. When she stood again, she shook herself, sending a cloud of dust and old stadium smell into the air. The sun had shifted. Light slanted differently through the gaps between the stands. Shadows moved up the concrete steps. Somewhere, a bird called, sharp and lonely. The mare walked back toward the tunnel. Her hooves made quieter sounds on the infield earth. The stadium repeated them softly, as if practicing in a whisper, now that the main performance was over. She stepped into the tunnel, hooves ringing slightly in the narrow space, and emerged once more into the rough strip of land behind the stadium. From there, she followed her own scent in a loose pattern until she found the gap in the fence and returned to the farm. Later that day, the owner noticed the broken boards. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath about the storm and the work it brought, and hammered a quick repair into place. He did not know that his mare had visited the track. Night came. The stadium lay under a deep blue sky scattered with weak stars. The city glowed faintly behind it. The wind prowled along the outer walls, poked at loose banners, and slunk into the tunnels. Inside, the track cooled. Sand, rail, and concrete settled, releasing the heat they had held during the day. Small sounds tapped and creaked in the structure as metal shrank slightly in the dark. Somewhere in the high rows of seats, a piece of plastic shifted. It slid a few centimeters, then stopped. The movement set off a faint tremor in the air. That tremor found the shape that had been drawn there earlier by hooves. The echo, once awakened, did not need a full gallop to return. It used the small trigger and stretched it. The stadium amplified the motion, feeding it into the curve of the oval, rounding it, multiplying it. For a few seconds there were footsteps where no one walked. Hooves ran in the dark, soft and fast, entirely made of memory and air. They made a half circle, then faded at the far turn. No one heard. The mare slept in her stall. The farm lay quiet. The city roads hummed at a distance. Yet the track had been reminded of its purpose, and the echo was eager to try again. In the days that followed, the mare went back. The repaired fence did not hold as well as the owner thought. A board that had been nailed in haste loosened. A small gap remained where determined noses and shoulders could push. She found the path and the tunnel more easily each time. Soon, the stadium became part of her range, another field in her mind, though unlike any other. On some visits, she only walked the infield, grazing among the tall tufts and listening to the slight returns of her own steps. On other visits, when the air felt cool and light in her lungs, she ran. Each lap taught the echo something. It learned the tempo of this particular animal, the slightly uneven length of her strides on the far side, where the ground had settled in a different way, the deeper impact of her hooves on the inner curve, the sharper sound when she occasionally struck a exposed stone. In return, it gave her company. When she tired, it finished the lap for her in sound. When she began, it opened ahead of her, promising space already filled with complete circles. On one afternoon, a stray dog wandered into the stadium. It had crawled under an outer gate, drawn by the smell of old food wrappers and the interesting variety of trash that tends to gather where people once met. It sniffed its way through the entrance, crossed the tunnel, and emerged onto the track. The mare was in mid-canter. The echo was in full voice, a thick rush of layered hooves. Sand flew from under her feet in small sprays. Her mane streamed along her neck. The dog stopped dead, its ears flattened, its tail lowered. Instinct screamed that a whole herd was coming. Eyes, however, saw only one horse. The dog turned and ran. It did not return. For a few weeks, it avoided even the street near the stadium, paws quick and nervous on the asphalt when it passed. The mare saw only the brief movement of fur at the edge of her vision. She did not slow. The echo wrapped her in its invented herd and carried her onward. Seasons turned again. Summer heat baked the track until rises and hollows appeared where it had once been flat. Autumn rains softened the infield into patches of mud. Winter frost tightened cracks in concrete and left thin white lines across the sand. The mare changed with them. Her coat grew thicker in the cold, then slicker in the warm months. She gained weight when grass was plenty and lost some when it dried. An old scar on her left hind leg stiffened slightly when the air was damp. Through all of that, she kept returning to the stadium. Sometimes she came after a long, quiet day on the farm, when boredom pressed at her from all sides. Sometimes she came after being startled by nothing in particular and needed to run the nervous energy out of her muscles. Whenever she stepped onto the track, the echo woke. It grew familiar with the shape of her heartbeat and the rhythm of her breathing. Its gallop matched her mood. There were days when it sounded like a calm workout, steady and controlled, and days when it rose into a wild sprint, loud and reckless, while her hooves hammered in sharp, quick strikes. The stadium itself aged. Concrete flaked, iron rusted, seats cracked, grass gained ground where sand lost it. Yet as long as one horse continued to cross the oval now and then, the place did not fall completely silent. If, in some later year, a new developer decided to knock the stadium down, machines would come. Before that happened, surveyors would visit, walking the perimeter with tablets and plans. They would talk about costs and options. At some point, one of them might send a small drone or camera into the interior to check the state of the stands. The camera would float above the infield, filming the pattern of weeds and fading paint. On the recording, if someone turned the sound up very high, they might catch something odd. Under the hum of the drone motors and the whisper of wind over the microphone, there might be a faint, steady rhythm. Not loud, not clear, but shaped like hooves, running one more lap around a track that refused to forget. By then, the mare might be old. Her visits might be slower and fewer. One day, she might stop coming altogether, her legs no longer willing to carry her that far. The farm might change hands. The broken fence might finally be fixed for good. The echo would wait. Sound leaves traces that are slow to fade in places built for it. The oval would still hold the memory of her steps and the countless races before her. On rare winter nights, when the air was just right and the city quiet, the stadium might use the small noises of settling stone and shifting metal to rebuild a gallop in the dark. Anyone passing on the road outside would hear only a strange murmur inside the closed arena and think nothing of it. But inside, for a few heartbeats, the empty stadium would fill with the thunder it was made for, taught once by many horses, and then retaught by a single mare, who had wandered in through a broken fence and given the echo a reason to learn to run again.